Welcome, everyone. Tonight we're diving into a chilling tale that blurs the lines between curiosity and fear, where an ordinary walk along a peaceful riverbank turns into a nightmarish encounter that will haunt the mind forever. As the sun sets and shadows stretch across the water, one man's routine stroll takes an unexpected turn, leading him into a mystery that has lingered for decades. What he sees that evening is unlike anything he could have imagined. An encounter that sends him on a quest for answers, only to uncover a terrifying truth. So settle in, let the tension build, and stay with us as we unravel the mystery of the figure by the river. Mike was no stranger to walking along the riverbank near his home. It was a peaceful routine that allowed him to clear his mind after long, tiring days. His faithful dog Max always accompanied him, running ahead and sniffing around in the cool evening air. This particular evening, however, would be unlike any other. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the rippling water, something caught Mike's eye in the distance. A shadow figure standing still at the river's edge. At first, it appeared to be just another person enjoying the fading light of day, but there was something off about the way the figure stood completely motionless. Mike's curiosity piqued as he slowed his pace. Max, usually bounding ahead, seemed to sense his owner's hesitation and paused, turning to look at him. The figure was far enough away that its details were indistinguishable, but there was an unsettling quality about it. As Mike continued to approach, a deep sense of dread began to creep up his spine. Something was wrong. The figure wasn't just standing still, it was unnaturally still, almost as if it weren't breathing or alive at all. The closer Mike got, the more his stomach churned with unease. His steps slowed, and every nerve in his body screamed at him to stop, but his curiosity overpowered his fear. Max, too, seemed to sense something wrong. The dog's hackles rose, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his throat. Mike could feel his heart beating faster as the figure's details became clearer in the dimming light. What he saw next would be etched in his memory forever. The figure was humanoid but disturbingly unnatural. Its limbs were too long, its skin an almost translucent pale, and its eyes, those eyes glowed faintly in the twilight. They locked onto Mike and Max, sending an icy chill down Mike's spine. This wasn't a person, it was something far worse. The figure's mouth stretched into a grotesque grin like it had been forcibly stitched onto its face. Mike's heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Max barked furiously now, the sound echoing across the water, but the figure remained still, watching. For a moment, Mike was paralyzed, his mind reeling with shock and terror. He had seen enough horror movies to know that he should turn and run, but his legs felt like they were glued to the ground. Every instinct told him to flee, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure. It stood there, watching, as if waiting for him to do something. Finally, as Max barked and tugged at the leash, the paralysis broke. Mike turned and bolted, pulling Max along with him. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest, and his breath came in ragged gasps as he ran. Mike fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling uncontrollably. When he finally managed to dial the police, he could barely keep his voice steady enough to explain what he had seen. The dispatcher tried to calm him, asking him to describe the situation, but how could he? How could he explain the unnatural, terrifying figure standing by the river, watching him with glowing eyes? Despite the dispatcher's calm words, Mike could sense the disbelief on the other end. They promised to send someone to check it out, but even after the call ended, Mike felt no relief. The figure had already burned itself into his mind. When he finally reached home, Mike locked every door and window, double-checking them repeatedly. He couldn't shake the feeling that the figure had followed him, that it was lurking just outside, waiting. Every creak of the house made him jump. His heart still racing from the encounter, sleep was out of the question. The image of the figure, its glowing eyes, elongated limbs, and that horrific grin played over and over in his mind. By morning, Mike was exhausted, but no closer to understanding what had happened. Despite his fear, Mike knew he had to talk to someone. He couldn't have been the only person to see the figure by the river. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to ask around. The next morning, after forcing himself to eat something despite his churning stomach, Mike went door to door in his neighborhood, asking if anyone had noticed anything unusual near the river. Most of his neighbors gave him puzzled looks, some even chuckling at what they assumed was an overactive imagination. However, when he spoke to Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, she mentioned something that caught his attention. She had seen strange lights near the river several times recently, but had dismissed them as pranks by local teenagers. Her words provided little comfort, though. Mike couldn't help but wonder if those lights were connected to the terrifying figure he had seen. With the unsettling memory still fresh in his mind, Mike resolved to return to the river. He needed to see it again, but this time in daylight. Maybe then, he reasoned, the light of day would reveal something that made sense. Max, sensing his owner's apprehension, trotted beside him as they headed back to the river the next morning. The sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the water, and everything looked so normal, so peaceful. But Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something dark lingered beneath the surface. As they walked along the riverbank, retracing their steps from the previous night, Mike noticed something strange. A trail of footprints leading away from the river and into the forest nearby. His heart skipped a beat. Could these belong to the figure he had seen? Gripped by a mix of fear and determination, Mike followed the trail, Max at his side. The footprints led deeper into the forest, and soon Mike stumbled upon an old abandoned campsite. The remnants of what appeared to have been a hurried retreat were scattered around. A torn tent, half-buried logs from a fire, and discarded belongings. Amid the debris, something caught Mike's eye. It was an old, tattered photograph. He picked it up carefully, his pulse quickening. The photo depicted a family, parents, and 2 children smiling at the camera. It was a strange, eerie find given the state of the campsite. Who were they, and why had they left in such a hurry? Mike knew he needed help figuring it out, so he took the photograph to a friend who worked at the local archives, hoping to uncover the identity of the family. A few days later, his friend contacted him with news. The family in the photograph was none other than the Hendersons, a family that had mysteriously disappeared 20 years ago. The connection was chilling. The campsite, photograph, and the terrifying figure by the river all seemed to be pieces of a larger, more disturbing puzzle. Mike couldn't shake the feeling that the figure he had seen was somehow tied to the Hendersons' disappearance. With his mind racing, Mike began digging into the local history, spending hours at the library and poring over old newspapers and records. What he found only deepened the mystery. The river had long been associated with strange disappearances, eerie sightings, and unexplained events. The stories went back decades, some even centuries. It seemed that Mike's encounter with the figure was just the latest in a long line of bizarre occurrences linked to the dark waters of the river. As Mike's obsession with the mystery grew, so did the attention it garnered. A local journalist named Sarah, known for her work on unsolved cases, reached out to him. She had heard about Mike's encounter and the strange history surrounding the river. Intrigued, she offered to help him investigate. Together, they started piecing together more clues about the Hendersons' disappearance and the river's strange history. Sarah's research skill proved invaluable. She uncovered old testimonies from neighbors who had heard strange noises and seen mysterious lights near the river around the time the Hendersons vanished. These witnesses had reported eerie occurrences, but no one had ever connected them to the disappearance until now. The deeper Mike and Sarah dug, the more they began to realize that something far more sinister was at play. Sarah suggested they track down the lone survivor of the Henderson family tragedy, Amy Henderson, who had been a child at the time of her family's disappearance. Amy had since become a recluse, living in a nearby town, and had refused to speak publicly about the incident. It took some convincing, but eventually Amy agreed to meet with them. The meeting was tense, held in the dim light of her cluttered home. Amy's face was drawn, her eyes haunted by the memory of what had happened. She spoke in halting, broken sentences, clearly traumatized by the events. Amy revealed that, like Mike, she had seen the shadowy figure by the river on the night her family disappeared. Her description matched Mike's exactly: the glowing eyes, the unnatural limbs, and the terrifying grin. She told them how the figure had watched her family for days, lurking just out of sight until the night it finally came for them. Amy's warnings were cryptic but filled with palpable fear. She begged Mike and Sarah to stop their investigation, insisting that the river was cursed and that whatever malevolent force haunted it was beyond their understanding. But despite her warnings, Mike and Sarah felt they were too deep into the mystery to walk away. They had to find out the truth no matter the cost. Determined to uncover more, Mike and Sarah returned to the abandoned campsite where Mike had found the photograph. This time, they made a chilling discovery: a diary belonging to one of the Henderson children. The entries were innocent at first, detailing the children's daily activities at the campsite, but soon the tone of the diary darkened. The children had repeatedly seen the shadowy figure watching them from the woods. At first, they had thought it was part of a game, but as the sightings became more frequent, the fear in their writing became palpable. The final entry was the most disturbing. It hinted that the family had decided to confront the figure the night they disappeared. The diary abruptly ended, leaving Mike and Sarah with more questions than answers. Why had the Henderson chosen to stay at the river despite the obvious danger? What had they planned to do? The discovery of the diary fueled their determination to dig deeper into the mystery. As they continued searching the campsite, they unearthed a rusted metal box buried beneath the dirt. Inside were more personal items belonging to the Hendersons: letters, trinkets, and photos. But the most unsettling find was a note from the father, hastily written, warning the children to run if they ever saw the figure again. Again, the note suggested that the father knew more about the figure than he had let on, and it raised even more questions about what had happened to the family. Just as Mike and Sarah were beginning to piece together the truth, they started receiving anonymous threats. The messages were clear: stop investigating or face the consequences. But instead of scaring them off, the threats only strengthened their resolve. Someone didn't want them to uncover the truth, and that only meant they were on the right track. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place when Amy finally broke down and revealed the full truth. Her father had stolen something valuable from a dangerous man years ago, a man who had sworn vengeance on the family. The shadowy figure, Amy believed, was either that man or someone connected to him, seeking revenge for the theft. The stolen heirloom was the key to the entire mystery. Realizing the importance of the heirloom, Mike and Sarah decided to track it down. Their search led them to an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, a place shrouded in local legend. Inside, they found the heirloom, a dazzling piece of jewelry hidden away in a secret compartment. But their discovery only intensified the danger. The anonymous threats escalated, and it became clear that the figure wouldn't stop until it had the heirloom. In a final desperate move, Mike and Sarah arranged a meeting with the figure. They chose a neutral location and prepared themselves for whatever might happen. When the figure arrived, it was revealed to be the son of the man wronged by Amy's father. He demanded the heirloom, threatening to kill anyone who stood in his way. Mike and Sarah, terrified but determined, negotiated with him, using their knowledge of the heirloom's history to appeal to his sense of justice. In a surprising turn, the figure hesitated for a moment. It seemed as though he might relent. Finally, after a tense standoff, the figure agreed to take the heirloom and leave them in peace. He disappeared into the night, leaving Mike and Sarah shaken but alive. Exhausted, they returned home, relieved that the nightmare was finally over. but the events of the past days had left a mark on them both. They had uncovered the truth, but at a cost. The mystery of the shadowy figure by the river had been solved, but they would carry the memory of it with them for the rest of their lives.